My grandmother left me her house. Not my mother, not my uncle, not my cousin, who spent every holiday loudly reminding everyone how much he loved her. Me. And that single fact destroyed my family faster than anything else ever could. I was 31 when she died. I'd been living in Asheville, North Carolina, working as a paralegal at a small firm downtown, the kind of job that pays your rent and leaves you exactly $12 until the next paycheck. My grandmother, I called her Gran, had a little greenhouse in Hendersonville, about 40 minutes south, 2 bedrooms, a front porch she sat on every evening, a garden that got out of control every summer because she refused to let anyone touch her tomatoes. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was hers, and she left it to me, and that was enough to make my mother stop speaking to me for 3 weeks until she figured out her next move. The thing you have to understand about my family is that nothing was ever said directly. Every conversation had a layer underneath it, a second meaning you were supposed to decode. My mother was the master of this. She could say, "You look tired," and mean 12 different things depending on which way she tilted her head. My uncle was blunter, less artful, but just as dangerous. And my cousin, her son, had spent his entire life watching both of them and absorbing the worst of each. Gran knew what she was doing when she made that will. I understand that now. She called me in January, 2 months before she passed. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just gotten back from the grocery store, and I was putting away a bag of oranges when my phone rang, and her voice sounded smaller than usual, like she was already preparing me for something. "I need you to come this weekend," she said. "Just you." I drove down Saturday morning. She made coffee, and we sat on the porch, even though it was cold, wrapped in blankets, and she told me that she was changing her will. She'd already spoken to her attorney. I asked her why she was telling me this, and she looked at me over the rim of her mug with those sharp gray eyes and said, "Because I want you to be ready. They're going to make this hard." She wasn't wrong. She died in March. Peacefully, her doctor said, which is the word they use when someone simply stops. I was the one who drove down when the hospice nurse called. I was the one who sat with her those last few hours. My mother arrived 40 minutes after Gran was gone, and the first thing she said to me was, "Did she say anything?" Not "How is she?" Not "Thank you for being here." Did she say anything? The will was read 2 weeks later. I already knew what it said, but hearing it out loud in that attorney's office, with my mother sitting 3 chairs down from me, watching her face go completely still, that was something I hadn't been prepared for. My uncle's jaw tightened. My cousin leaned forward like he'd misheard. My mother didn't move a muscle. The drive home was quiet. I thought maybe it would stay quiet. I thought, foolishly, that they would take some time and process this and come back to me like adults. My phone rang before I even reached the highway. She must have been confused, my mother said. No greeting, no pause. Toward the end, she wasn't herself. "You know that." "She seemed perfectly herself to me," I said. "You were always her favorite." She said it the way you'd accuse someone of stealing. "You took advantage of that." I didn't answer. I just listened to her breathe for a moment, and then I said, "I'll talk to you later," and I hung up. That was the opening act. The next 3 weeks were a slow escalation. My mother called every day, sometimes twice. She cycled through voices. The disappointed one, the wounded one, the practical one that tried to negotiate. Maybe you could sell it and split the proceeds. That would be the fair thing. My uncle sent emails. Long, legal-sounding emails that I recognized as the kind of thing someone writes at midnight when they're furious and thinks sounding formal makes them seem rational. My cousin texted me things like, "You know this isn't right," and Gran would want the family to be together on this. I didn't respond to any of them. I'd learned from Gran herself that sometimes silence is the only honest thing you can offer. I drove back to Hendersonville on a Thursday to start sorting through her things. The attorney had already transferred the deed into my name. I had a key. The house was mine. My mother was sitting on the front porch when I pulled up. I didn't even know she had a spare key. She must have had it for years, from some long ago time, when Gran had trusted her with it. She was sitting in Gran's chair with a cup of coffee like she'd been there all morning, and when I got out of my car, she looked at me with this expression I can only describe as deliberate calm. The kind you perform when you want someone to know how much effort you're putting into not losing it. "We need to talk," she said. "You're in my house," I said. She flinched at that, just barely. "It's your grandmother's house. Same thing now." I unlocked the door and walked inside. She followed, which I expected. I put my bag down in the kitchen and turned around and waited. What came next was a performance I hadn't fully anticipated. She told me that Gran had been struggling with her memory in the final year. She told me that the attorney was a family friend and had probably been influenced by me. She told me that she had spent years, driving down to help Gran, bringing groceries, taking her to appointments, doing the things that needed to be done, and that it was deeply unfair that none of that had been considered. She was not yelling. That was the thing. Her voice never rose above a certain register. She made it all sound entirely reasonable, like she was simply laying out facts, like if I would just think clearly for a moment I would understand. I let her finish. Then I said, "Gran told me she was changing the will in January. She told me herself. I didn't ask her to." My mother looked at me for a long moment. "You should have told us," she asked me not to. The silence that followed had weight. She picked up her purse from the kitchen table, and I noticed then that there were papers in it. Documents, folded, the corner of something official sticking out. I don't know why I noticed that. Instinct, maybe. 5 years working as a paralegal teaches you to watch for paper. She left without another word. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, professional, introduced herself as a legal assistant from a firm in Asheville. She said my mother and uncle had retained an attorney and were planning to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. I sat down on Gran's kitchen floor and stayed there for a while. I want to be honest about something. I almost caved, not because I thought they were right, but because the idea of fighting my own family in a courtroom, of depositions and discovery, and all the machinery of a legal dispute grinding through Gran's last months like they were evidence, it made me feel sick. It still makes me feel sick. There were 2 days where I genuinely considered calling my mother back and telling her we could figure something out. Split it, sell it, whatever she wanted. But then I found the folder. Gran kept a filing cabinet in the second bedroom. Old woman, old habits. Everything organized, labeled in her handwriting. I was going through it when I found a folder marked simply important for my attorney. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated November of the previous year. In it, Gran described, clearly and in specific detail, why she had made her decision. She explained that my mother had borrowed money from her, twice, and had not repaid it. She explained that my uncle had pressured her for years to add him to the deed, which she had declined. She explained that she had watched me work hard with no help from anyone, and that she was leaving me the house because she believed I would do something good with it. And because, and this was the line that broke me open when I read it, she deserves to know that someone in this family chose her. I scanned every page. I emailed it to my own attorney that same evening. I'd called one the morning after I got the notification about the contest. A woman my firm had referred me to, quiet and precise, and exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when someone is trying to take something from you. Her response when I sent her the folder was, "This changes things considerably." The legal process was slow and expensive and exhausting. My mother and uncle hired a specialist in will contests. They deposed Gran's hospice nurse, her doctor, her neighbor who had been her friend for 30 years. They submitted medical records. They argued that the letter itself was proof of my influence, because Gran had mentioned me in it. I sat through all of it. I did not contact my mother during this period except through attorneys. I did not respond to my cousin's texts. I went to work every morning, came home, fed my cat, and tried to sleep. What I did not do was fold. There was a moment in the deposition where my mother's attorney asked me whether Gran and I had ever discussed the house before January. I said yes. Once, years ago, she'd told me she'd bought it with her own money after my grandfather died, and she'd never wanted anyone telling her what to do with it. The attorney paused after that, just for a second. I could see him recalibrating. Gran's doctor testified that she had been fully cognitively intact until the final 6 weeks of her life. The will had been changed in January. The math was not complicated. 4 months after they filed the contest, they withdrew it. I don't know exactly what my mother's attorney told her. I know it cost her money she didn't have. She sold a car. I heard later through the one cousin I still talk to. I know my uncle stopped emailing me around the same time, which felt less like peace and more like retreat. The morning after I got word that it was over, I drove back to Hendersonville. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a few minutes just looking at the house. The porch, Gran's garden, still dormant, brown and flat, waiting for spring. I thought about all the times I'd sat on that porch with her. I thought about the phone call in January, her voice smaller than usual. "I want you to be ready." I thought about the folder she'd left in that filing cabinet, labeled so plainly, "Important." For my attorney, like she'd exactly how this would go and had prepared accordingly. She'd been protecting me from beyond her own death. I don't think I fully understood that until I was sitting in her driveway, with nowhere else to be. I called my attorney from the car to say thank you. Then I went inside and made coffee, and sat on the porch, even though it was still cold, because that was what Gran would have done. I had a blanket from the closet, and I sat there until the sun went behind the trees, and for the first time since March, I didn't feel like I was bracing for the next hit. The months after that were quieter than I expected. My mother did not call. My uncle did not email. My cousin sent one message in July that said, "Hope you're doing okay," and I responded, "Thanks. You too," and that was the extent of it. Some silences are hostile and some are just exhausted, and I couldn't always tell which this one was. I stopped trying to figure it out. What I did instead was fix the roof, which had needed it for 2 years. I cleared out Gran's garden in April and planted tomatoes in May, badly, nothing like hers, but they were mine. I drove up to Asheville for work and drove back on Fridays. I started thinking about what I actually wanted to do with the house long term, whether to live there, rent it, something else. For the first time in my adult life, I had a choice that wasn't just survival. That alone felt enormous. A friend from work drove down in September to see it. She stood on the porch and looked out at the garden and said, "Your grandmother sounds like she was something else." "She really was," I said. I didn't check my family's social media for a long time. When I finally did, in October, I found exactly what I would have found if I'd been paying attention all along. My mother posting about family and togetherness and the importance of holding people close. There were no pictures of me. There had never been many. I scrolled for a while, and then I closed the app, and I didn't open it again. What I kept thinking about was the letter. She deserves to know that someone in this family chose her. I had read that line so many times during the legal fight, printed it out and kept it in my work bag, pulled it out on bad days. It wasn't a victory speech. It wasn't a dramatic reveal. It was just a quiet old woman sitting down with a pen and paper and deciding, carefully and deliberately, to make sure I knew. That was the whole of it. Not a courtroom triumph. Not a public confrontation. Not a moment where I got to say the perfect thing while everyone watched. Just a green house in Hendersonville, a folder in a filing cabinet, and a woman who saw me clearly enough to choose me, even when it cost her the peace of her own last months. I was in Gran's kitchen in November, making soup. The weather had turned, and the garden was done, and I'd bought a butternut squash from the farmer's market because she always made it in the fall. When I realized I was okay. Not in the dramatic sense, just in the ordinary sense. I was standing at her counter, in her kitchen, in my house, making soup on a cold afternoon, and the silence was just silence. Nothing underneath it. No layer to decode. I think she knew this would happen. I think that's why she called me in January and said to come alone and told me to be ready. She knew the fight was coming, and she knew I'd have to go through it. And she wanted me to know ahead of time that she believed I would come out the other side. She was right. I still sit on the porch most evenings when I'm down here. I bring a blanket and coffee, and I watch the light go flat over the hills, and I think about what it means to be chosen. Not because you're the easiest, or the most convenient, or the one least likely to cause trouble, but because someone watched you long enough, and closely enough to see who you actually are. That's not something everyone gets. I know that now. I'm not going to pretend the family stuff is finished. These things don't finish, they just settle into new shapes. My mother is still out there. My uncle is still out there. Maybe someday one of them calls, and we have a conversation that isn't about the house or the will, or whose fault it is. Maybe we don't. I've stopped spending energy trying to predict it. What I know is what I have. The house, the porch, the November soup, the letter I keep in the drawer of the bedside table in the second bedroom. What I know is that my grandmother was the most quietly formidable person I have ever met in my life, and she spent years watching me struggle alone and decided, when it mattered, that she was not going to let me keep doing it alone. Some people go their whole lives without someone like that. I had her for 31 years. That's enough to build on.